This is Thursday, December 19th, 2019, Board of Health meeting. Just to like to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded by video and audio. Is there anything that's not on this agenda that anybody would like to talk about? Seeing nothing, we'll move on. Director's report.
In the interest of time, I provided the director's report in writing so that we can review at time. But it is just an overview of the amount of inspections we've done in the last month, the amount of tasks we've done regarding inspections. We have 590 tasks completed, which just kind of shows how busy this can be even during a holiday season. But the rest will be in the record.
Okay. Review of the minutes. Any additions or corrections from anybody?
I'm good.
I get a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, public hearing.
Okay. So we'll need to open the public hearing.
Okay, I get a motion to open the public hearing on Regulation 51.
I make a motion to open it.
Can I get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public hearing is open.
Okay, so this is a continuation of the public hearing that we started in June 15, I believe, regarding Regulation 51, which makes the Nantucket watershed mirror the Nantucket Harbor watershed, where an IA system upgrade would be required at all system failure, property upgrades, property renovations, or property transfer. So as a result of that, we had set a date certain to start on July 1st of 2019, pending a review of the groundwater quality through SMAST and things like that. Excuse me, sorry. However, the SMAST report kept getting delayed, and it was finally delivered in early November, mid-November. So we had that on the agenda last month, so just so that we can get it into the public record. And then now, pending the information that was given in the SMAST report, we have today's public hearing to discuss whether we should accept a date certain to require those amendments that were voted on last year, or if we should scratch the amendments from last year, or if we should postpone the implementation of that date pending more information. And after that, it's up to you.
I have a question about, I thought the findings were interesting, but just a question about the IA systems in Nantucket. It seems like we see a lot of variances already in Nantucket for being too close to either setbacks, but probably more importantly, wells.
Yes.
The IA systems are so massive. If all of those triggered new IA systems in Nantucket, are we going to see a lot of variances? Are they all going to be reasonable?
We will definitely be seeing some variances, mostly setbacks. Mm-hmm. And that's if they maintain a well on the property. Mm-hmm. There is town water starting to go down, and they're in, I believe, phase 4 of that upgrade. If they choose to connect to town water, then a setback to their own well shouldn't be too much of an issue. Especially if they abandon it as a potable drinking water well. The issues would be the setbacks to other wells. However, we tend to accept variances in Nantucket based on what's considered maximum feasible compliance by Title V. So far, we haven't seen nitrogen contamination in a lot of drinking wells down there. The water does move very fast because it's a very shallow aquifer. However, we are seeing some saltwater intrusion, which actually makes the function of an IA system more difficult, because the salt does affect an IA function. So we would recommend people connect to town water.
So, and in terms of saltwater intrusion and looking at some of the flood zone maps, some of the newer ones that we're seeing, how much is that going to impact the Forget the drinking water, but the septic systems themselves.
Significantly. You're gonna want to have at least the electrical component of the IA system outside of the flood zone, or at the very least in an area that is waterproof. If the electrical component of an IA system fails, or if the blower where they're pulling in fresh oxygen from the air, if that gets compromised as well, the IA system fails. Just electrically, not functionally. If when that failure is more in the concept that the electrical system will go down, but then it starts working as a traditional septic system
Okay.
until it can get repaired. The electrical portions get repaired. But absolutely, flood maps, flooding, high level flooding. We've seen 3 500-year storms in the last 5 years. It's definitely a concern, and it's something to be considered. The public.
Anybody out there want to comment? Leslie?
Leslie Forbes. I don't know whether you addressed this while I was out in the hall on a phone call, but in reading Regulation 51, it was hard, the boundaries, did you talk about this already?
No, we did not.
So in 51.01, it describes a boundary for where this regulation would apply. And in 51.05, I think it is, it describes a different boundary. I think they need to be synchronized. The first one, I couldn't even, it refers to Broad Creek. Broad Creek hasn't been around for a really long time. And it didn't cover, as I understood this geography, it didn't cover a lot of Nantucket. The second time it's mentioned the Nantucket Harbor Watershed Protection District, Zones A and B. There is a map that exists for that on the town website. So I think that needs to be cleaned up.
Absolutely. Leslie is correct. That idea was brought up earlier to me. When the regulation was originally written, the boundaries of the Nantucket watershed were done using landmarks. And as Leslie just mentioned, Broad Creek is a landmark that no longer exists. So since those landmarks have kind of gone away, we've been using the GIS map, which is the Watershed Protection District. I do believe that we can definitely define the Watershed Protection District. It is defined in the definitions regulation as the GIS map. But I believe that the relic of the original regulation is in there, and I can have that stricken.
Right.
I can definitely replace that.
Yeah, because it's encompasses A and B.
A and B, with the Watershed Protection District as defined by Regulation 50.
Right.
I'll speak again. A question representing the members of the Nantucket Conservation Association. We had a member come to us to inquire about shared septic systems and how this would apply. There are several, at least 5-unit buildings that share a septic. I am not informed as to whether their septics are in compliance or not. But it is true that in one of the 5 units, a homeowner has decided to sell their unit. Obviously, if this unit sells before the regulation or if the regulation takes effect, there's no issue. But if this person ends up selling after Regulation 51, and if Regulation 51 takes effect, how does this regulation say the other 4 owners have to behave?
Do you want to cover that, should I? I can answer.
I've actually had a citizen ask me the same question.
Okay, so in the way I understand it, and Art, correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, and we also have an expert engineer in the crowd. The way I understand it is, at the transfer, it is a shared system, and it would be required to have the upgrade. Because there are supposed to be easements already in place with a covenant of that shared system on each individual lot, representing how much each individual homeowner is responsible for when it comes to maintenance of the septic system. If they haven't maintained that covenant themselves, it will be definitely difficult to interact with the neighbors, because one person decides to sell, the whole system would have to upgrade. But it is the same way that it's happening right now with the system, and I believe that one of those systems has actually failed. And in the property transfer, the same situation came up, in which case all 5 property owners had to pay together to get the system repaired. Art?
I don't think I can add too much to it. And in some of these cases, not to complicate things, the regulation isn't going to really be a factor, because these are undersized lots that exceed the nitrogen load and would have to install an innovative alternative septic system anyway on at least failure. Now, or new construction, certainly property transfer, then the regulation would come into place.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is that septic system that they're all in now designed for the total number of bedrooms that they have?
It is.
So
Yes.
the IA system would have to be
Sized for the same.
sized for the same thing?
Correct. And some of these condos on Arkansas and on South Cambridge Street, none of them have basements. They're all built on a crawl space, so they're already built out to the maximum.
Right.
Thank you. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land Council. In general, just a little bit of support for the work the Board of Health's doing, and everyone's patience for this report and getting a chance to take a look at the new scenarios that were run through. I think that it does certainly point out, again, the importance of handling wastewater in the watershed out in Nantucket. And one question that I did have relative to the work that SMAS did is how they accounted for seasonality of use out in Nantucket. I'm not sure if that's something that was included. It wasn't really spoken to in here, and how much of an impact that would have overall on their calculations. And then, I mean, in general, we certainly are supportive of making changes to help improve the nitrogen loading in the watershed. I think we certainly will look to the town to continue to work on a more comprehensive approach and continue to work on fertilizer regulation enforcement, and continue to work with the landfill to hopefully help clean up some of the stormwater issues on site and other work out there as well, but are certainly supportive of making some improvements to wastewater treatment out in Nantucket. One question that I did have about the Regulation 51, my understanding is that if, based on this, it has the requirement for the upgrade to an IA system, but then also requires that if sewer becomes available, that properties tie into it. And I know in the Nantucket watershed, there's a bit of a variance or a waiver allowance if someone puts in the IA system and sewer then becomes available. And maybe I missed it. I wasn't sure exactly where in Regulation 51 that's spoken to or specified in the amendments. But I just wanted to ask the board to discuss that as well.
I think when we passed that variance, it included the whole island.
Okay.
So anyone who, in a certain time period, spends the money, puts an IA system, and sewer comes, they have a longer period of time to hook.
Okay, so it's not specific in this regulation, but it's in
As
another
I
regulation.
recall, it's specific for the whole, it's for the whole
Okay.
island.
It's a blanket variance for the whole island for 10 years.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much.
And it's a good question about how did SMAS account for seasonality. I'll reach out and see how they get that information. It was not explicitly written out.
Leslie?
So I've been reading a lot about IA systems. And it would seem on Nantucket, basically, it's Septitech or Microfast. When you go to the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, run by George Heufelder, they have, they list more systems, and they divide them into categories. There's general use, which as far as I understand means general use, just go ahead and do it. And then there's provisional use, which evidently seems to be working. They're good IA systems. There just is not, you have to hit a certain threshold of number of systems in place before it can move from provisional to general. And on the Cape, provisional use is acceptable, is an okay brand. If the IA system you want is a provisionally allowed, then you can put it in your property on the Cape. So that brings me to this long drawn-out introduction idea as to what systems qualify as IA on Nantucket. What are you allowed to put in? What meets the criteria?
You can do it. I can answer it as well.
There are a lot of systems out there that are considered innovative alternative and also components. But I believe there's only 5 that are for nitrogen reduction, and those are the ones that we here are requiring, because it has to be a DEP-approved nitrogen reducing technology. So they pretty much 5. So it's Septitech, Microfast, Amphidrome, Nitrex, and Ruck probably are the 5. There may be a 6th. Anyway, that we're aware of and approved by DEP. So there are other systems that fall under IA, but they don't reduce. They don't give you the 50% reduction of nitrogen. So we certainly wouldn't approve those.
Any of those 5, a homeowner could employ.
Yes, any of those 5.
And that list we can get over.
Don Bracken, I'll be quick. I just want to add one thing about provisional use. It is provisional, so if the system is tested and it's found that that system is not removing the nitrogen like it's supposed to be, under provisional use, the Board of Health or the state can make them replace that system with another system. That's the big difference. That's the big advantage to making sure you use general use.
Do we know, are all 5 systems approximately the same cost?
No, they're wildly significant difference, and also in size. So the nitric system that Art mentioned requires a couple of reactive barriers below the leach field, as well as down gradient of the leach field. And it has to be a certain amount of space away from the leach field. That would only work in large properties. So in Nantucket, you wouldn't see a lot of nitric systems, mainly because they just don't have the space. Microfast and Septitech are actually the same company. They just have one bought out the other recently. But they're relatively similar in cost. Same thing with Ruck, is a very specific set of criteria that it has to meet. So on the island, I think we only have about 1 or 2 Ruck systems. Yeah, we don't have a lot. And then Amphidrome is actually also a size concern.
Okay.
Amphidrome is usually seen as a large system.
Is there a correlation between the smaller they get, the more expensive they get? Or is
No.
it just, so it really is, there's a couple different factors, space, but also cost?
Yes.
That homeowners will be able to choose from?
Yeah, space and cost is the two biggest concerns.
Okay.
Anybody else? Comments?
I'm good.
I did have one more question on the results and the different scenarios that were put forward. I was just reading through again, the aquaculture only brings it down when it's in conjunction with the IA systems approach
Yes.
with everything else.
Yes. Yes. So the scenario, I believe it's 4 in the SMAS report, and also in the executive summary that was also posted in last
There's
month's
5
packet.
you considered, Greg.
Yeah, there were 5 scenarios. Scenario number 4 is an aquaculture in Hither Creek in conjunction with IA systems in Nantucket. Doesn't bring it 100% down to the 0.45 milligrams per liter requirement from the total maximum daily load, the TMDL. So that is a very strong option because it brings it down to 0.46, really close to the requirement, but it would have to be in conjunction with something else, something like partial sewering, even all the way up to sewering. It would have to be in conjunction. There are many ways to approach this. It doesn't have to be, let's sewer all of Nantucket. It doesn't have to be that, but it also can't be, let's do nothing.
But sewering is a system that is 100% reduction of nitrogen plus
In that area, yes.
everything else that's not measured here.
Correct. Including upcoming emerging contaminants.
Right. And we also have to remember that the TMDL is somewhat arbitrary. If you read the definition, it says as minimal pollutants. The word still has pollutants in it,
Yeah,
which means it doesn't mean it eliminates the pollutants.
correct.
And it tends to vary from place to place. And here it was calculated on oxygen levels, water depth, and a whole thing about eelgrass. And if you read any of the 2 reports, I got quite a headache after a while trying to figure it all out. But the point is, we may actually have to have lower levels.
Correct.
Just doesn't mean everything will be fine when we get to 0.45.
Yeah.
Just one point, make sure people don't say if some point we see a 0.45, that's a regulatory point.
Yes.
It doesn't mean we have water that's not polluted.
And the TMDL can also change. So right now it's 0.45, but 20 years from now, DEP can say, we were wrong, we want it down to 0.3.
Yes, and it's actually in the harbor, it's actually lower than Nantucket.
Correct. The harbors is lower.
Which tells me that, well, I said it all. We shouldn't get fixated on that.
Yes.
Which harbor?
Nantucket
the,
Harbor
The Nantucket Harbor
is
the Great Harbor
355.
is 0.355.
Has a lot to do with depth in eelgrass. And I would, if someone could tell me what's happened to the eelgrass since 2009, when the last time any of that data was really accumulated? Emily, do you know? Or we have.
What's happened to it in Nantucket specifically? Are you
Nantucket or the
talking
whole
about?
island, because a lot of this is based upon eelgrass calculations done in 2009, which was a while ago.
And I think a lot of the work that had been done previously was more of a general mapping, and there hasn't really been a lot of long-term monitoring of the health of the actual beds and meadows themselves. So, I mean, that's something that we certainly could use some more data on.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, Nantucket Harbor in general, and probably one of the reasons the TMDL is higher is because of the additional flushing that it gets compared to Nantucket Harbor. So it doesn't need to support the same water quality in order to receive the
Yeah, I
same
mean,
fresh water.
They took places where the eelgrass wasn't doing well and measured nitrogen, and where it was doing well, and somehow concluded that you could make sweeping conclusions about the minimum levels, which is,
But there's so many different variables out there
Exactly.
that are affecting the eelgrass now, right?
that's what I thought.
The new report is out.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
On the Ilga?
Yeah.
No, I haven't read that.
Yeah, temperature, light,
Like,
predators like green crabs,
Not crabs.
boat
it's
use.
Complicated.
Just additional stress, I think, from the water quality in general is making it a lot less resilient than it used to be.
temperature.
Exactly.
The part of this, we're getting into the larger discussion now, and so this is a model. There is no cost-benefit analysis that goes along with it. With a budget with no end, you could do whatever you wanted to make things 100% perfect. But we do need to balance cost versus benefit. And I don't know how to do that with the information that we have here. And I would encourage you, I, as a citizen and a Nantucket resident, I think, and you were touching on this, that the idea of a many-pronged approach with costs attached to each of them is really the best way to look at this. Whatever, we are doing some things right because Long Pond has met its TMDL. Certainly Hither Creek has gotten better some years, not as good other years. We haven't had enough of a long-term improvement, but we are doing, and even the SMAS technical memorandums from the previous 3 years have commented on how whatever is going on at the landfill is working. It's doing good things, and that requires some more study. I mean, that's from the SMAS people themselves. So I think that when we start talking in larger terms about trying to meet TMDL in Nantucket, that a conversation needs to be had about a lot of efforts to get at it. IA systems is one, sewering is another. The landfill, Land Council has paid to have a stormwater retention design put together so that the leachate generated by that landfill perhaps stays on the landfill property. I mean, as someone who does their own gardening, I happen to go down to the compost piles. I mean, those things, I'm not good at, they're huge, and they are on bare ground. And my assumption is that they have a lot of nitrogen in them because it's leaf and yard waste. And there's only like 10 people on Nantucket that don't fertilize their yards. The town, remember the meeting we were in? Where it was sprinkling and the town was fertilizing its lawn here at Fairgrounds? One would think the town would be the demonstration project. That's another, anyway. The Buzzards Bay Coalition, which is an organization located on the Cape that is tackling water quality issues, particularly in Buzzards Bay. They are hosting a conference, date not set yet, called The Unintended Consequences of Composting. I'm on the list to hopefully get an invitation. Enforcement action on septics, we're sort of caught in this weird situation in that a system fails, and maybe I could be updated on this, but there was a time when we were told that sewer was around the corner, so don't do anything, just wait. Then it moved to, well, don't do anything, just get an ACO. I don't know how much people are being set systems in failure, either hydraulic or regulation, are being forced to comply. And I don't know how many IA systems we have in Nantucket now.
114.
Thank you.
Yes,
Out of 400 some
or so.
total.
Yeah.
I estimate that the good citizens of Nantucket have already spent $5.7 million. So I've often wondered what would be the cost of sewering when we've already spent, or citizens have already spent close to $6 million while we've been waiting around for some decision about sewering. That's what upsets me. I don't think it's fair to Nantucket because you're going to go on spending more and more money. As I say, as this regulation goes into effect or doesn't, you're going to get going 6 million, 7 million, and the cost of sewering is what?
80?
I've heard that 80 was an overestimation. I don't know.
Yeah, Weston Sampson has said that the 80 was a gross overestimation.
So if it was 40 million, I mean, you've already spent
6.
6. I mean, that's crazy. And so to me, it's just illogical we don't sewer. I mean, we can have more studies, we can have more reports. I've spent 45 years looking at various medical and scientific reports, and I've got a headache reading all of these. Let's just go on to a solution. And the solution to me would be sewering. You've got 100% nitrogen reduction. You also get reduction of all the other things that we're not even measuring. And I think it is, was pointed out at the last meeting, this isn't a Nantucket problem. This is a Nantucket problem, an island problem. I mean, everyone wants to do something, but like anything, no one wants to pay for it. You know, we've spent months talking about parking on this island, but let's get on to something that's important. If we don't have the environment and we don't have clean water, we won't have any place, we won't have any reason to park. So I guess my challenge to the select people is why can't we get sewer back on discussion in Nantucket? I mean, there's a lot of capital projects that are on the books, but we have to prioritize. Because what's going to happen is by the time we get around to sewering, the residents of Nantucket are going to spend $80 million or $40 million.
I don't think they'll spend 80.
Yeah, so 40 million, whatever. You've already spent close to 6. It's crazy. I'm sorry. That's my thoughts.
Hence the cost-benefit analysis for these other pieces of the puzzle as well.
Well,
Sewering
they're all
some,
fine and will help.
IAing some.
But I like to do it. I'm a simple guy. The simplest thing is sewer. You don't have to have multiple studies and lots of experts and
I disagree. I don't
meetings.
think
You know, that's the
I hear
simplest
you.
way. I'm not talking about cost. I'm talking about the simplest way. Now, of course, the problem is cost, and there's a lot of people that talk a lot about it will encourage development. Well, that's something the select board and the planning board can deal with, in my view.
part
opinion.
of the many-pronged solution. Put some zoning changes in to keep, there is a Nantucket area plan,
Yes.
which talks about rural feel and low density. Currently, there are some zoning bylaws in place with setbacks and ground cover that speak to that. But I think the strongest one right now is the Board of Health regulation about 10,000 square feet per bedroom.
I would think we keep that. I mean, the island was never designed for this many people. And we can't,
Pull the bridge up.
we can't build a bridge. We can't, send people back to the island. So we have to deal with what we have. And what we have is a way we have to deal with our
So
lots of
I
things.
know it's not the Board of Health purview, but part of the many-pronged solution,
many-pronged solution,
would be to work with planning and to promote TMDL and promote the Nantucket area plan.
Absolutely.
So broad view.
Thank you.
I would like to add on to what you said, Malcolm, because on many points I do agree. I sort of look at the 0.450 TMDL and, what are the benefits of that? And I know Jeff Carlson has brought up, what does ecosystem health looks like? We can meet those daily loads, but is it still functioning? And I think looking at the scenarios and none of them really bringing us even to that, as you said, Roberto, somewhat arbitrary number, the money that will be spent by individuals as well as by the town to not even achieve that TMDL, it's not all that encouraging.
It's not encouraging at all.
I also do worry a bit about if we went down the IA route and we decided we were going to go down some sort of hybrid approach using some of these. I am concerned about flood maps. The cost to the town is we're looking at what coastal resiliency. What do we do when these septic tanks go in and then there's flooding and then all of a sudden who takes them out? If there's persistent flooding over time. And some of the emerging contaminants as well. So I think flooding and emerging contaminants we don't know. But to your point, Malcolm, if we choose this path and 24, 30 million is spent by homeowners to put in these IA systems only to find out they're not adequate for some of these question marks that we know we have to answer in the near future, then we're taking them all out and starting again with something else. So I don't know what the results will be, but again, those haven't been particularly encouraging either.
Yeah.
So, and I think it should go back to the select board. I think the select board has really been looking to the Board of Health to review what SMAST came back with. So it hasn't been on our radar. I would love to talk about sewers instead of parking. So I think it's really this report that we've been waiting for at the select board level as well as here.
So what lies ahead, what lies on the table for us then is, do we set a date certain for this regulation? Do we push an implementation back for the IA systems? Do we strike it completely? And anytime we can also request more study, more information from the select board.
Let me ask you one question.
Yes,
In
sir.
all reality, taking the cost of anything out of here, as we sit here today, if we all agree that we want sewer in Nantucket, in your estimation, what is the timeline before they would start?
Before they would
We've missed the
start,
town meeting, right? So we have to wait till
Another
next town
year.
meeting. There's a year. Okay, and then how long did it take when we from when we started this stuff in Monomoy?
when they started in the SHMO, the planning had already been completed by the time the vote happened. So, because we had appropriated money for planning, which is where they got that, I think it was $60 million or $50 million price tag originally for the SHMO. 46, that's what it was, which it came down way underneath that. So by the time town meeting voted, through the RFP process and everything, I believe the first shovel was in the ground just under a year after that town meeting
It was a
vote.
500-day
Yeah.
project.
Okay, and when was the first, they haven't even finished tying the people in, right?
Not everyone, no, they haven't finished tying
So
everyone
how
in, but a lot
long,
of
how
people
long a
are.
time has it been since when we started? 3 years?
We're at about 3 years now.
Okay, so we're looking at minimum 3 years, if everything goes our way and we get funding, and we could do the sewer in Nantucket. So we have to decide, what are we gonna do for the next 3 years?
That's the question on the table today.
Yeah, that's it, 3 years.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen next year, or the year after, but maybe the year after.
And in 3 years,
So in the meantime, how much money are they gonna spend?
it's crazy.
It's insane.
And every one of them will have the 10-year variance.
Yeah, right,
So
they'll have an
which
IA
makes it-
system, everybody will have an IA system that they don't have to tie into the sewer for 10 years.
Which would make it less likely for a sewer vote to pass.
And that's if everything goes according to plan.
And that's if everything goes according to plan.
Do we have any number estimate for how many IA go in a year?
In Nantucket, I would have to look at our file again to see how many we've had in this last year. We do log in all of them in our in our software, in our management software, when they went in, when they went online. I just don't have the numbers in front of me of how many were put in this last year.
And they'd be triggered again by transfer, sale, failure,
Or renovation, or any new
any
construction.
new building permit?
Correct.
So interior,
Correct.
anything.
Anything that requires a new certificate of occupancy or an occupancy, the occupancy certificate, certificate of completion.
What do you think, would there be problems getting financing for this?
The state revolving fund, they've been bulking it up over the past few years, expecting these issues to start coming up. The Cape will probably be first priority because we've been ahead of the game in putting sewer in, and they've been extremely behind the game in putting sewer in. For example, Falmouth is looking at almost $500 million project just outside through everything because they have to build a whole new treatment plant altogether. But it's the chance of financing is high. The town does have a AAA rating, but the issue is the same thing, as always.
So
Are people going to vote for it?
So there's no way to fast track this with a special town meeting?
There would be. We can probably put it on a special town meeting. However, select board and town administration
No, but I'm
and all
saying
them would have to
that would wipe a year off this whole thing,
at least 6 months,
if we could have a special town meeting
possibly.
to cut 8 or 9 months out of that.
Possibly.
So now we have to look to the Board of Selectmen.
Of course.
Okay.
And it depends on the recommendation from this board.
Here's one thing
You
that
do it so eloquently,
well, here's,
Malcolm.
I,
Make a motion.
I'm not sure what motion to make because
If we're at the point of making motions, we would have to close the
to
public.
we'd have to close the meeting.
Okay.
I'm not
public
at a
hearing.
point of making a
All right,
motion.
okay.
I'd like to just bring up a certain thing that I've been thinking about is the sewer, we spend all this money to bring the sewer out there, and then potentially, what if nothing changes? I'm all about point source detection. The Land Council, with its eelgrass study and the people they hired to do it, isotoped the sediment samples, the eelgrass, to figure out what nutrients they were using up, and it was very interesting reading. And to me, I didn't see any of the numbers for human fecal coliform with sewage isotopes. The numbers weren't there. And I'll be the first one to say we need to bring sewer to Nantucket. I don't understand why we can't isotope the water samples. It's the first thing any scientific study should do. The problem is we've been we go back to Brian Howes. He's just created himself a big, money machine, which he'll consult and do anything. If you want to study oysters, he'll get a grant to study oysters. And then nothing changes. So I'm all about isotoping the samples. I'd be more in favor of putting off this implementation of the regulation until a further date, till we see what's gonna, maybe what's gonna happen. Potentially, people may vote to bring sewer out there.
Absolutely.
I just don't want to do something now that, like Malcolm said, the money is astronomical.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I always hate whenever you're in a tough situation, people say, well, study it, do more studies. So eventually you start doing more studies till you get the study with the results you want. Right. You have an intrinsic bias. I mean, what we have right now is these scenarios suggest that watershed nitrogen reductions, wastewater nitrogen reductions provide the most significant improvements in TN concentration in the harbor. That's what we have. And it's not perfect. It is not perfect. But just logically, If you have a sewer, all the other stuff besides nitrogen is going to be in the groundwater. It's just, you don't have to have a study to show that.
Right.
My problem is, I'd hate to not implement this, because then there's almost no incentive to do anything else. And next year, who's ever on the board will want to get 6 more studies from 43 other consultants. If we implement it, it's a real burden on the residents of Nantucket. It's just not fair. So somehow, the government, the town, is we've really not done well by our citizens. So I'm kind of thinking, and maybe when you close the hearing, we talk about motions of, I hate to do this, is actually punting again. And really, as a Board of Health, really push the select people to get moving. I don't know. None of the potential votes that we're going to make, I think, is the correct one. So,
I think at this stage as well, I think without a little more discussion from this board or with recommendation, I think the select board is going to have a lot of questions as well that will put it off. I think there's going to be questions about the cost, the benefit. I think even Stephen, from your point of view, what else do you need to know? And is there any way to soften the blow? What is that middle ground? And I don't know right now that the select board has any better answers than if we just punted it to them, to us right now, that we would have any better answers than what would come out of this board at this stage. But I think understanding what everyone's questions are here and concerns, and seeing if we can get some of those answers without full-blown studies. Maybe there is a study. But I think you're right. I think the more questions we have, the more likely someone will say, what's the next study we can do?
let's just move forward with
Well, let
something.
me ask a question. Don't you people, doesn't everyone believe that somewhere down the road, Nantucket's going to get sewered? I mean, do any of you really say, I think it'd be safe we could find it so it would never have to be sewered? And if you can't, and you think eventually it's going to be sewered, it's never going to be any cheaper than it is today. And if it's going to have to be done eventually, why don't we just bite the bullet and do it? And like Malcolm says, you put sewer in and all the bad stuff goes away, everything. And the problem's settled. And I understand what you're saying. You don't want to jump on it too soon, but even if you wait, eventually, Maddox is going to get sewered, one way or another.
We've been talking about this for years.
I know.
So I'm very upset that the thought that we'd continue to talk about it, but I guess we have no choice.
Well, I think also when there's nothing groundbreaking coming out of this study, other than that there's no great solution that gets us there, other than sewer. And I think there's still a multi-pronged approach with sewer, including the zoning, including the fertilizer regulations, and identifying other point sources above and beyond the septic. But I don't think the results really speak to continue looking at all the other things we might find out about how good IAs might be, or get us down to the TMDL that we're looking for. And again, the TMDL, my question, and it would go probably back to Jeff Carlson, is what does that actually even mean from an ecosystem function? I think in terms of coastal resiliency, which is a select board priority, is we need to be thinking less about what sort of arbitrary regulatory numbers are and understand the true ecosystem function that is going on in these harbors, wetlands, and areas in order to protect the island long term. So.
Well, let me ask another question while I'm shooting my mouth up here. But in the meantime, if we don't do anything, is there any way that we can get tight tanks temporarily instead of doing these IA systems until we decide one way or another whether we're going to, if there's a chance that we might not have to sewer it, at least if you get the state to agree to put tight tanks in, everything still goes away.
We can ask the state to look into it and possibly make a decision. Chances of that actually getting approved is very slim. Mattocket as a whole is not an area of active erosion, so they don't. It's not defined as a velocity zone, which is the area past Ames Ave, for example, which is considered a tight tank district for that very reason. You can never sewer it because of the active erosion. Mattocket as a whole is not an active erosion. Certain places are, but in general, the watershed is not. So to get tight tanks approved, which is considered a very last resort from the state, would be very difficult to get that approved. Very slim, mainly because of the ability to actually install normal septic systems in the area. They would more likely support us doing an IA requirement before they allow us to do a tight tank district.
Roberta, how do we get some of these costs? And I think there's the cost of these scenarios, a revised cost of sewer. And then I right now, if you put in an IA system, sewer comes in, you get a 10-year variance. Do we waive the sewer connection fee?
No,
No. So we don't do any other concessions or waivers.
no, we do not.
I would do that.
That would be my question.
I would waive that, and I would distribute the cost across the whole island.
And there was at one point a variance request, a waiver request from somebody who was required to put in an IA when the Shimo sewer was put in, and the select board at the time denied it. They did ask for a waiver.
Some of the questions that I would have would be, can we make any reasonable estimate of how many, in say the next 2.5, 3 years, how many ice systems might go in? And then I would consider if there's some sort of concession that can be made to homeowners that do put them in the next 2 years, and look at that as part of the cost of sewering. I have no idea where those numbers would fall, but I do feel like we're caught between a rock and a hard place, and not doing something, and then say sewer doesn't pass, we're still in the same place.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at that. The 10-year, we could always, we could even extend that time,
Make it 15.
Yeah.
especially after they've done their due diligence and what we've asked them to do prior to the, sewer coming.
I think you're both right. I think the key would be to give all the possible financial breaks as possible and distribute them to everyone. And like what Mr. Greeter said last month, he said, this is not a Mattocket problem, this is an island problem.
Well, I think we have to do something, given the reality of the time frame. I mean, the best scenario is 3 years. Realistically, it's probably closer to 5 if you think about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
If we don't get something started, nothing will ever happen, so.
Yeah, and Mattocket is a huge project.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, you can close the public, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I don't know about anybody else.
Motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Aye.
So now we just have to vote to see, should we set an implementation date or to strike all the amendments altogether?
Well, I think, in my opinion, we'd like to hear the others, that postponing the implementation will actually do nothing. I mean, what will it do?
Nothing.
Nothing. And I think we should implement this regulation, and I think we should ask staff to explore ways of amending the present variance regulation to give the maximum amount of financial assistance to the residents involved in this. And I would suggest that that as a Board of Health, we present to the Select Board that we need to get on with sewering. And all the things that Rita talks about, other cost estimates, is fine. We should do that too. Someone, I don't know who would do that. Jeff?
It'll be Jeff, myself, and then we can also bring it up to town administration to run, to get
Yeah, I mean,
cost.
sir, that's my recommendations.
to implement now, or?
Yes, why wait? Well, you could put it off a month until see what financial, well, no, we don't really have control over that, do we? No. About sewer finances, we don't have
No.
that control.
The most we can do is ask for that information.
We don't have control of that.
I'm just trying to think through, it, for some reason, it seems like I would want to say, hold off on implementation, not long, but say it's a month to try and get
Okay,
the
fine.
financials, the costs.
Fine, I agree.
And then we present to the select board, and if the select board comes back and says, we're not interested in sewering,
Okay,
then we know we're implementing with no additional waivers, variances.
you're a
et
good
cetera.
balance, thank you.
Okay. Well, you started it. I was only editing.
I will make a motion.
Okay.
I will, that we implement the regulation in 3 months. Whatever those dates are. But with the caveat that all this other homework will reoccur at that time. So at the January, February, March, actually, I won't be here in March. At the, we make it April?
We can make it April. Make April 1st. Well, town meeting is April 4th.
Well, we're not going to get anything at town meeting.
No.
I mean, the March, third Thursday of the month, I won't be here. You don't need me. Just, I would 3 months, and then all that stuff we wanted be presented before the next vote, something like that.
In April is the 16th,
Yeah, third Thursday of the month in
is our meeting.
March is, that would be the 19th.
19th.
We can set the implementation on March 19th.
And would it be something we'd be able to get these? I think it would be ideal to present to the select board prior to that with, again, just trying to think through, going to the select board in February, saying, this is the response that we got, this is where our concerns, we're planning on implementing March 19th,
Right.
but we see these other options and these are the costs. And then our implementation can be, I don't know if we can, again, if we decided that, if the select board said, we're going to pursue sewering, then would the implementation involve certain waivers and variances or further discussion, something like that? But that's what I think would make the most sense to me, is to present before we implement, if we can get the costs.
Yes, I'm just afraid all those cost estimates of all those other little things.
If we're,
Somebody has to do that.
so my suggestion would say we do set an implementation date so that we can close the public hearing altogether.
Yes.
Set the regulation, but if we put it less than 3 months, in order to change implementation date, we would have to set a new public hearing.
Okay.
So March 19th is not bad, but don't forget, we also, if we decide to reopen the public hearing, we would have to advertise in the Inky for 3 weeks ahead of time. So we can get you information, information required, specific information you're requesting. I can get it to you by that March 19th meeting if we set the implementation on the April Board of Health meeting. That way we can have time to advertise for a public hearing.
So I
It
would,
would be April 16th.
and then,
April 16th.
and then you can just, someone on your staff could present it to the meeting and send me a copy.
Exactly.
I'll be in Florida.
Florida's really nice that time of year.
I love Nantucket and I love the Board of Health, but I'm not going to give up a trip. So the motion is, staff will prepare the cost estimates as requested, and that the implementation date of Regulation 15 will be April 16th. That's the motion.
I'll second that.
What was the date for implementation?
April 16th.
15th.
Can I get a second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chairman says aye.
Okay. Okay.
So the the data would be March 19th. Okay.
Okay.
One thing, sorry, actually, that we didn't discuss formally is if we wanted to put together any specific or formal recommendations to the select board before, and maybe we need to see the costs and then do that.
Do that, yeah,
So just for a future agenda item.
right, okay.
Yeah, I'll put this on the agenda again for the January meeting. That way, I can bring this forward to all this information that I have to you for the January meeting, and then we can make any recommendations to the board, to the select board at that point.
Okay, next up, genetic mice update.
Another topic without any controversy. All right, so as you all know, when we instituted this project, the Board of Health nominated a steering committee. Well, the steering committee actually only had one meeting. It hasn't been functioning very well. A lot of reasons is that it is a committee, advisory committee, whatever, that does not have a chairman. So it's very hard to get anything really organized. And the roles and responsibilities are a little mixed. So at your suggestions, I've sort of started to move forward to get it organized. One thing is, we asked the Board of Selectmen to nominate someone, and Rita was nominated to be on this committee. And at one point, you actually said that I could make all the selections for the committee, which is quite nice, but I don't want to be accused of abuse of power. But I would just like you to kind of, if you have any objections to the present committee, let me know. The newest people who I've asked and expressed interest is Dave Gagnon, who's the executive director of Mariah Mitchell. He does run one of our large science organizations on the island. Before he came to Nantucket, he was actually involved in the organic food industry. And I thought we needed somebody to remind us of our ethics, perhaps. And so Reverend Max Wolf of St. Paul's has also agreed to join. So that would be the committee of Rita, Dave, Max, Emily Goldstein Murphy, John Goldman, who's a part-time resident but is a retired infectious disease professor, editor of a prestigious journal, and Danica Connors. So if you have no problems with that, I'd just like an endorsement that will be the committee.
Yeah,
Excellent. Good balance.
Fine. Now, so what I'm going to do is, for the January meeting, I'm going to look at the original charter and perhaps update it and try to make it a little more in line with reality, and ask you to approve that charter. It would be on the January 9th meeting, because this is a committee selected by the Board of Health, so therefore the Board of Health should be telling the committee what they're supposed to do. And then February 7th, we have a meeting scheduled where the agenda would be making sure everyone understood the charter, obviously a project review from the MIT scientists, and we also have to elect officers. So that's just an update of what we're doing.
great,
Thank you.
thanks. Okay, waste hauler regulations.
Okay. So as we mentioned at the last Board of Health meeting, we've been working with DPW and the DPW's recycling coordinator, who are both the director and the recycling coordinator, are both here today. I forwarded you the draft regulations as they're written. I'll give the floor to Rob to give us an update on where we're going with this. And then once town council approves the draft regulations, we can schedule a hearing for regulations implementation this coming year. So, Rob, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to the board. This is something that's been near and dear to my heart, and something that we've been looking at DPW for some time now. Basically, we've been asked by the select board under their strategic plan to take a look at waste, solid waste, and the programs for solid waste island-wide. Starting in our own backyard at the landfill, we've spent countless hours looking at operations and trying to look for efficiencies. Beyond that, taking a look at existing regulations regarding the packaging, et cetera, all the way down to hauling. So with that, we've reached back out to our state partners, Mass DEP, and through the years, they have sent out updated model private hauler regulations. We've read through those. We've met with DEP, and we've met with their support folks. We've spent hours with Roberto and with some of the island haulers, speaking with them on various topics with regard to changes in waste streams, as well as some of the things that we're interested in handling, particularly secured loads, to keep from having litter collected and transported, blow out, and end up on the sides of the roads where DPW needs to deal with it. More particularly, and I think the focus of the changes that we're asking the board to consider is having to do with recycling. And so the model regulations the state recommends includes what's called bundled service. Because the waste ban, which is essentially the state's way of or how they regulate recycling, they create a waste ban. So the mainstream of what's considered municipal solid waste, the exclusions from that stream are ultimately hazardous wastes, recyclable products, and that sort of thing. So the waste ban has been updated by the state periodically through time. Includes most recently commercial food waste, up to, I think it's a ton a week, needs to be diverted from landfills. Prior to that, things like commercial construction demolition debris and those sort of things. Recyclables quite a ways back, I think in the 80s. So currently, there's no language in the hauling regulations that required a bundled service. And so without that, it ultimately, it doesn't recognize that recycling is required. And so if people are simply providing hauling services and are not required to offer recycling as part of their waste collection, there's sort of a disincentive and can be a monetary disincentive to be able to participate in what's required at the state level. So we've put some very simple language together that just talks, and it's right from the state's model regulations that they recommend. Towns try to adapt, and that is included in here. We've taken an opportunity to recognize that the way that waste is handled once it comes to our facility is a bit different with the composter here than most places off island. We've also taken into account the fact that we are working to try to clean up those waste streams, specifically the compost stream. Not to bore you, but there's lots of information out there. We started about a little over a year ago to try to recognize or to quantify exactly what level of contamination existed in our current stream that was being directed to the composter. And we found about 35% contamination, which was considered way too high for us. And that was resulting in unnecessary landfilling. because really the only thing that's being landfilled are the residuals that are not able to be composted. And important to that note is, so these non-recyclable, non-compostable items that make it, that are still being thrown away and sent to our composter from homeowners and commercial sources alike, make it through the other end of the composter and then get screened off. But when they get screened off, they're coated with compost, the beginnings of the compost process. And so we're first of all landfilling materials that shouldn't be in that stream to begin with, but now it's doubled with contamination of compost. So material that's missing the opportunity of continuing through the compost process and becoming a beneficial reuse. So these bales, these large desk-sized bales of residuals from the composter ultimately get landfilled. So it's taking up unnecessary landfill space. The best option here is to really clean up the streams as best we can, and a program that really helps encourage that process, starting with a bundled service for recycling and a more robust education and ultimately an enforcement program through the Board of Health and in cooperation with Public Works, I think is a smart approach to be able to move forward and improve our entire island's solid waste and recycling programs. Happy to go through any specific details that are included here, but I think it's a nice complement to existing regulations that are here on island, specific to the current solid waste disposal, Chapter 125, the mandatory segregation and recycling specifically. There's also a revised permit application. One thing that was a bit, I'll just say it was a bit alarming to learn when I first arrived was that the permit setup, the way it's currently set up, permits an entity for $100 annually. And I think we have about 6 that are currently, that fall within that category. So we're not looking to necessarily turn this into a major revenue source, but the idea of being able to permit per truck makes sense to us, to be able to have the ability to take a look at the fleets that are expected to be able to safely deliver and accomplish the goals as described here across the island. So are they sort of set up to handle what's expected? Are they properly covered, or do they have tarps built in or available for each vehicle? And what we see time and time again is whether they're handed to their staff or not, they're not being used, and they're just traveling across the island unsecured. And we see the results, unfortunately, at all times of the year. So doing a per truck fee would ultimately allow us as a town to be able to inspect the fleet annually and to be able to make sure that these systems are set up to produce the kind of results that we're looking for. Again, with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions you may have, and as we start this process and hopefully end up with a revised regulation.
Maybe you could tell these guys that with these revised regulations now, you'll be able to apply for certain grants and things.
Yes, thank you. That's a great point. So circling back to the Mass DEP program, there's certain grants that we would be eligible for that we're not currently, because we don't have language specific to a bundled service in the regulations currently. So that would be a big help. That this year alone, we've applied for, our solid waste recycling coordinator has applied for it and been awarded over $92,000 in state grants in support of our various programs. So that's a fantastic start, and something that we believe will be able to continue but we want to continue to enhance that ability, and this is certainly another step to do that. Well, thank you, Stephen.
I'm not quite sure I understood. Is it $100 per business entity or $100 per truck? You're saying you're permitting each truck?
Currently, the fee is $100 per business entity.
Okay.
What we're proposing in here currently for discussion purposes is $100 per truck. And that sort of gets at, depending on the size of the company and the number of vehicles per their fleet, that the application would be more in line with the services that they're providing around the town.
Right. That makes sense. One other question, just based on what Matt Fee brought up last night when we were talking about, wasn't this, but the idea that sort of a private hauler, by the definitions that are in here, could be someone who, say, a construction company, their primary business isn't hauling waste off a site, but they're a private business that is hauling solid waste. Is there do any regulations in the state ever capture that, or is this really just talking about businesses whose primary business is waste collection?
Sure. So that's an excellent question, simply because it falls within definitions, and it's really a matter of what we are looking to capture. As you know, Rita, the Select Board's strategic plan, particularly the environmental goal number 1, I believe, is the one that we're shooting for with regard to solid waste, speaks to data-driven decision-making. One of the things that we're keen on is trying to gather as much data as possible. And so whether it's specific streams that are being captured and brought to the site, how it's being captured, if it's runs over the landfill scale house, or if it's something that's estimated, and how is it estimated, by whom currently, and those are the things that we're working on. We have a contract with a community data platform to really start to take a look at what we have for available information, to start to look at trends. But beyond that, we're questioning what else should we be collecting? What are we currently collecting that we ought to be collecting differently or more efficiently? And so getting back to who ultimately should be permitted. I mean, that's really a question for all of us to answer before we jump into this. And right now, the way this is written talks about all private haulers that are collecting, transferring, or transporting solid wastes, right? And solid wastes are defined in this regulation shall mean all non-hazardous waste, including but not limited to the primary wastes, which is previously defined as recyclable, compostable, and non-recyclable, non-compostable wastes, mattresses and furniture, refrigerators and freezers, scrap metal, tires, electronic waste, leaf and yard waste, brush, wood, construction, demolition debris, asphalt, brick, and concrete, otherwise known as ABC, and mixed excavation waste. So this is drafted specifically to be comprehensive, and I think it's up to us, and particularly the board, to really get at what it is, how many permits are you interested in getting involved with here? So are we specifically trying to target the current 6 companies that are already permitted, or are we looking to expand this at all? And I think that's something that we'd like to discuss.
Great, thank you. So so by definition, it could be more inclusive as to who needs to be permitted, but in practice, we're really just focusing on primary waste right now.
It could be, yes. And I'll bring up just a few different points for discussion. Some kind of just some big ticket items as far as what the data shows. Right now, 75% of the island's waste is hauled to us. 25% is dropped off. So that's the haul stuff is a combination of commercial and residential. The drop off is primarily residential. So that's just the kind of the macro data for the island solid waste. There's clearly a benefit to having solid waste companies collect neighborhoods worth of waste. It really helps keep a lot of the traffic off the roads, and particularly having the facility on one side of the island. There's a lot of traffic, obviously, on Nantucket Road. We've worked through a lot of the internal traffic circulation issues that has largely eliminated backups onto Nantucket Road that existed, a few short years ago. But we need to continue to work on that to make sure that we don't have those kind of traffic issues. Beyond that, we need to start thinking about leaf and yard waste, maybe, because a number of landscapers and the amount of material. There was a comment earlier about the nitrogen and other potential sources that might be, parked right on a major wetland system at the south side of our campus. That's just the separation between Long Pond and that leaf and yard waste area. And it was alarming to me to learn that we take in more leaf and yard waste tonnage than we do solid waste in 1 year. That really surprised me. Over 12,000 tons of leaf and yard waste are delivered to our facility every year, and that's more than the entire town's solid waste, including the summer. It's a lot. So there's some things that are worth discussing, and maybe it is worth, taking a look at permitting them to be able to get at a little bit more data. I don't know.
Good point.
Any other questions?
Good.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Variance request, 24 Winoma Way.
All right. So I believe there's a representative for the property owner here. You can just go ahead and go from here.
John Bracken Engineering. Steve Cohen is also here representing the owners, Emily and Thomas Woods. I'll do my best to try to untangle this. It's kind of convoluted. I don't know if, Art, you want to go first, or you want me to take a stab at it first?
I'll go first if you want.
No, I was just offering if you want. Okay, I'll take that advice then. I'm sure Art will have a say anyway. We came in sort of after the fact, and if you read the variance request letter, this is for post facto variance request. A building permit was issued to finish off a basement back in January last year, and the contractor, started the construction process, finishing off the basement. The permit wasn't routed to the Board of Health for review or check off. At some point, and I can't recall how, but the Board of Health became aware of it. Went, saw the site. If I'm incorrect, please step in, Art, but went, saw the site, and I believe issued a cease and desist or told the contractor he had to stop. There was some work that continued on the project. Around that time is when we were called, because Art instructed the contractor that, you have to come to the Board of Health, and in order to get Board of Health approval, this is considered new construction, which nobody disagrees with, and it's a pre-1995 septic system. So the septic system would have to be upgraded to the new standards. Came after 1995, IA system installed and so forth, which is the typical process on any of these small nitrogen-sensitive lots that, propose any additional living space or anything that requires a building permit. So I looked at this, okay, if we were to come into this, ahead of time, what would we request from the board, or what avenue could we find in order to be able to get this permitted? So I kind of simplified it in the letter, but I'll give you a little more history on the lot so you understand how we got to this point with the request. The lot is only 5,000 square feet, and the septic system was installed just before Title V change with the 1,000-gallon septic tank and leaching pit. And because of the wells in the area and the size of the lot, the leaching pit was actually installed in the roadway layout. Not the roadway itself, but in the right-of-way between the property line and the edge of the pavement. Very narrow, deep pit. It was the only place back then under the old regulations where you could fit a leaching system. So in order to repair that system, or upgrade that system to current requirements, we looked at it, we did some sketches. It would require us to come in under local upgrade approval to get a waiver or variances because we couldn't meet the 100-foot setback to our own well and to 2 neighboring wells. So if we were to again do this ahead of time properly, what I would ask at that point is if we could install the IA system required no matter what, and be able to keep the leaching pit, which was designed for 4 bedrooms, and not seek the waivers or not go any closer to the neighbors' wells. Now, the owners, you know, they're not opposed to putting in a new leaching system and going closer to neighbors' wells, you know, if they have to, or if that's a, you know, possibility that the board would entertain. So the other important note is when it was originally approved back then, it was approved for 4 bedrooms. And currently in the house, there are 4 bedrooms, but the way the house is configured, there's only 6 rooms total in the house. So with the additional 3 bedrooms that 3 rooms that are finished in the basement, that would be a total of 9 rooms. So technically, it still could be considered a 4-bedroom house, you know, under Title V, and I think under the local regulations. Now, the rooms in the basement that are finished consist of an open room that's open to the stairway when you go down to the basement. Another room that had a window installed, an egress window with a closet, looks like a bedroom, you know, feels like a bedroom. And then there's a 3rd room. It's a very small room, just over 80 square feet. The only window it has is a typical basement window. It is all finished and it has outlets and lights, but you know, that looks like it would be used for storage. So I guess there are two things I think need to be focused on, and you know, or you know, Roberto may have others, but you know, number one, I think we can either, you know, reconfigure the rooms that are there. We still won't be over the 9 rooms total, so that technically we still only have 4 bedrooms, and that whatever design we do still falls within the grandfathered 4-bedroom status of the septic system. The other issue is whether or not this board would have granted approval of a local upgrade to go from a leaching pit to a newer, larger horizontal area system and give the waivers to the wells. So I think what we're asking for, again, is simplified post facto, is to be able to keep the leaching pit and not have to go to neighbors' wells, or if this board would want us, you know, considering all these facts, to upgrade the system entirely, we're happy to do that as well. So I'll either answer questions or let Art go. It's up to you. I think hopefully I made that as clear as possible, because it took me a while to untangle this whole thing myself, so it's just getting thrown on you now. But.
Why don't we have Art?
And if I said anything that wasn't 100% correct, just, you know, please correct me.
No, Don was pretty much right on the money. There's just a little bit of detail that I'm going to add to it. And the biggest issue here is this is new construction. And when you do new construction, you have to comply, okay? They cannot put a compliant septic system repair on that system. They would have to come to you for waivers. So the compliant system's got to meet the setbacks to the foundation, setbacks to the property lines, setbacks to groundwater, wells, you know, have a reserve area on the property, just like it was a vacant lot. So it kind of addresses so that unbuildable pieces of property don't get built on or overbuilt. So when we talk about local upgrade approval, which we do a lot in here, it's on failed systems, on undersized lots They're not doing new construction. They're just trying to repair a system, and so that they can stay in their house and protect groundwater and the environment. So there's a big difference there. This situation, it's a 5,000 square foot lot, like you said, and the system's not even on the property. That leach facility, like you said, from 1990 today is going to be probably 2 times the size, because in 95 it changed, requiring the leach facilities to increase by roughly 100%. So they can't comply. It would be, granting, obviously, staff does not recommend granting this variance. And, granting the variance only opens the door to develop properties that have already reached maximum build-out. Every lot has a threshold. This one has reached it and then some. I mean, the nitrogen loading alone, it doesn't even come close to. And the innovative alternative septic system that they're proposing, they're going to have to install when this system fails, and it will fail. So we're not getting anything for it. So that's some of the detail. I want to kind of give you a history on the building permit, of which Don was mostly accurate. There was just some things I want to fill in. The building department issued a permit to do something in the basement. We don't know what that was because it never came to us. Every building permit that's on septic system has to come to us for approval. We do a room count. We see if the septic system has to be upgraded and whatnot. It never came to us. Okay, so the building inspector goes out and does a framing inspection. And when he goes to do the framing inspection, which is open studs in the basement, he goes in and says, whoa, this is beyond the scope of what we permitted. You need to go to the health department and get this approved. So they come into the health department with an application. We review it, deny it based on the septic system upgrade, and we don't hear anything. Not that they needed, to tell us anything or not. But anyway, the building inspector a few months later then contacts me and says, hey, this place is done, it's finished. So we go out and we site them. And the builder comes back and says, geez, how can we fix this? I'm like, remove it. That's how you fix it. And so from there, I asked him, hey, what's the basement look like? He goes, it's finished. It's painted, plastered, electrified, trimmed, and everything. So they were stopped at framing and continued after we denied this project. And, it's just like, if we grant the variance, it's just rewarding bad behavior. It's also, the same, go ahead and do it and ask for forgiveness later. To grant this variance would open up some doors for a lot of properties who want to, expand their properties, but they've already reached maximum build-out. They can't. It's a nitrogen issue. It's has long-reaching arms. So, as a staff, we recommend denying the variance. You got any questions?
I have one quick question. Did the building department somehow not see the denial from the health department? Or how were they able to get other inspections done?
I can't answer that question because I don't know.
In
how that
theory, though,
happened.
they should have seen the denial and then it shouldn't have been allowed to progress? Is that how it works?
Well, from what I'm told, they stopped it at framing.
They were supposed to stop.
That's what I was told from the building inspector. He stopped them at framing.
So did they, and this is probably more building, but did they not get the inspections they needed and the sign-offs they needed for the other work, the building work as well? We don't know.
I can't answer that
I don't
question,
know
unfortunately.
what inspections they have.
Okay.
All right, I have a question. When when they come back to you, the place was just framed,
Yes,
and then when did you do a cease and desist?
right then.
Right then? And
Within the time, the building inspector stopped them at framing, sent them to our department, and then they submitted an application and we denied it.
And then after you denied them and sent them a cease and desist, they just continued?
I can't, it got finished somehow from there.
All right, well, let me ask you, and then the building inspector signed it off?
I don't know about any of that.
Yeah, we don't know if you've signed off.
This
on
is, rather than this being a building issue, this is in my mind, this is a homeowner issue and a contractor issue.
Okay.
Anybody on a septic system or anybody in the business of building on this island knows if you're on a septic system, you got to get health department approval.
But the reason you gave them a cease and desist was because of a septic problem?
Yes.
Correct, because it did not have a compliant septic
Right,
system
okay.
for the new construction.
Okay,
I was pretty sure they couldn't comply, but I usually send them
Right.
to an engineer so that they can confirm that for them.
okay.
So, sorry, can I just ask, so at that point, they couldn't comply with the existing, there was no way they were gonna be able to get a variance or update, or they could have at that point?
We would deny it, and then, of course, you could grant a variance, and that's what they're here for today, is
Right.
to have you grant a variance to make this work.
But could they comply without the variance?
No.
Okay, fine.
No.
So, Stephen Cohen for the applicant. I'm here with Don. I think that Art's information is more, is mostly correct, but I think it sheds a slightly more negative light than it may have really happened. And I will tell you, I did not become involved in this project until essentially after the work was done, so I can't assert that I had firsthand knowledge, but I do know that the contractor who was involved, and frankly, I think the issue was a combination of a lack of understanding by the contractor of the relatively complicated scenario involved here, and a failure by the building department at the time, and I believe that it happened on a number of projects, not this one case, to act as the stopping point for issuing this permit. The contractor went down and filed a building permit application and was issued that building permit application and thought that they were proceeding, all well. When they framed out the building, so it was originally applied to be finished basement space, no bedroom, and which is what it is, but when they framed it out, they included a closet. And I believe that the inspector, when they did the framing inspection, said, with this closet, I think you're more into the bedroom area than you are into finished basement space. You should go talk to the health department to get a permit for that. So at the time, the contractor was under the impression that he had a validly issued building permit and was going ahead on that, but if they were going to consider it a bedroom, you better go to the Board of Health. And he went, and that was denied. And they were under the impression that, okay, well, we can't have a bedroom here, but we still have a valid building permit and we can finish this out. And it wasn't until July 29th, I think, that the cease and desist was issued. And when that happened is when they contacted me and when they contacted Don, and they had stopped work. But at that point, basically, they had, if not entirely finished, nearly finished what was going on. So I think part of it was a relatively significant misunderstanding of what was actually supposed to be happening, and frankly, a failure of the building department to not issue the permit in the first place, which it shouldn't have been issued without having gone to the Board of Health first. And like I said, I believe that happened on a number of occasions at that point, and that has since been remedied. The process has been remedied so that it shouldn't happen again. But we're left in a situation where the homeowner did not understand what was happening, the contractor did not understand what was happening, and the work was proceeding, they thought, under a validly issued permit. But somewhat regardless, it's not your role to decide if someone was naughty or nice, and whether they should be, punished or rewarded. And we're not asking you to. What we're asking you to do is to look at this, purely from a situation where there's a septic system that was installed in 1995 that, is one of those systems that, we look at it today and think, what were they thinking issuing permits for, pits in the road? But it was common in Tom Nevers and other areas at the time. And, what we'd like to do is see the board issue an approval that allows for a net benefit for both parties. So in other words, the homeowners would like to have some version of a finished basement with no bedroom and no plumbing. And if we could install an IA system and a leaching field if necessary instead of a pit, that's a benefit to the environment. It's a net health benefit, and the homeowner gets something out of it too. So, and they're not currently required to do that. So it's a benefit. The only other thing I want to add, and I don't think that Don said it, is that there are 2 wells on the abutting lot that are impacted by this, and only one of them is shown on a plan. The other one seems to have turned up at some point, and it's the closer one to the lot. We think it's a spite well. It might be an irrigation well. We don't really know what it is, but there's no reason for that lot to have 2 wells on it. And we assume that the further one, which is the official well that was applied for originally, was both the first well and the applied for well, that is likely the drinking water well, the potable water well for the property. And we're not sure what the other one is, but the other one seems to have been put there to shove the septic system out into the road. So I just want to point out that the variance is impacting a well that likely is not servicing anybody. We are very flexible on what could be done in the basement, and would like to see if the board is willing to find room for a net benefit for health purposes and a net benefit for the homeowner as well.
So let me ask you a couple of questions. What is in the basement, not right now, for rooms?
So if you
You
come
were
down,
supposed to put in 1 room?
no, the building permit was for 3. What? 3? What?
It was the
Yeah, it was for 3 separate finished rooms, no bedroom. And if you go down there now, you get to the bottom of the space, and there's like a 12 by 18 room that is finished, that is open to the stairs. And then on one whole side of the rest of the wall is an unfinished space that has the chimney foundation and the furnace, and it's an unfinished mechanical room. It's got the HVAC. So that whole space is unfinished and full of mechanical equipment. Then on the other side of that is 2 rooms. One of them is a storage room, is just a finished space that you would consider truly to be a storage room. It's not really big enough to do anything. It's just, like a big closet. Then there's another room that they want to use for like a kid's room or an office or something like that, but it has both a window and a closet in it now, both of which could be addressed. But that was when the inspector saw that there was a closet and a window, he said, "I think this is a bedroom. We better look into it," which was, the right thing to do.
So there was a bathroom in there now?
No bathroom.
No
plumbing.
The toilet was in there?
No, there's no plumbing.
There's no plumbing at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's the mechanical room, so there's plumbing for that, but none of those rooms have plumbing. There's no bathroom.
No, all right. Vitus and I have one question. When they get the building permit in this new construction, do they automatically have to go down and get a permit from you guys?
They have, any building permit on septic system has to come to our department for approval.
And they didn't come to you?
Did not.
Well, right, but the contractor doesn't bring it down to the Board of Health. The building permit is circulated by the town, and I think the failure here was at the time that was not happening. Is that correct, Art?
No, the town does not circulate that building permit. The contractor brought it to us. In fact, it's been a bit, and I don't want to. His contact information was on the back, and he was the one
But
who.
my question to you is, I want to get this straight in my head. After the builder gets the building permit, somebody has to come down to you before the building starts and get permission from you?
Yes. So Usually the way it works is the contractor goes to the building department, pulls the building
Right.
paperwork. When they go to turn it in, when the building department sees that it is in septic, they actually tell them you need to go to the health department
Right
first.
away, before anything starts.
Before anything starts. Usually and then the contractor does the running of the permit itself.
Right.
That didn't happen this time.
Right. So the contractor should have actually brought it down to the Board of Health to get the sign off,
Yeah.
but instead the building commissioner signed it and issued the permit.
Correct.
Which is why the contractor thought they had a validly issued building permit. And what they had was a building permit in which the commissioner had not required all of the signatures that he should have. And I think that was a commonly occurring, briefly occurring frequent activity for a couple of months.
So then when the contractor brought the permit down to him,
Yeah,
and he denied it and said a cease and desist,
yeah.
the builder just kept building it out?
Well,
No, it's a simple
yeah,
question.
no.
Did he keep building it out, or did he stop?
He did not stop.
Okay.
He should have stopped. He was under the impression that this could be fixed with a variance, or
Well-
this could be fixed by removing the closet. He did not understand that he was,
But let me
digging
ask
a
you
deeper
something.
hole.
I mean,
Yeah.
he couldn't think that he had the right to build it. If he gave them a cease and desist, there had to be a reason. No one went down to find out what the reason was why they had to stop. They just continued.
Yeah, he did not do the right thing, but he thought that he just can't have any bedrooms down there, and he thought, okay, no problem, we won't have any bedrooms down there, we'll take the closet out or something like that. He didn't understand that it actually applied to all of the finished space. And, he probably was having, other concerns like, what am I doing? I already, I've built this out. What are we gonna do?
Well,
So-
I understand, but if someone comes to my house and says, you got a cease and desist order here, I would say, okay, guys, stop, let's go find out what this is all.
So he didn't have the cease and desist until July 29th. He originally had a building permit in which he then was told, while the work was getting done, go get Board of Health sign off also. And he went to the Board of Health and he was denied, what he thought he was denied on was you can't have any bedrooms. And he was thinking, well, I'm not doing bedrooms, so we'll change that. He did not continue doing work under the cease and desist. He did continue doing work with the Board of Health denial. So it's not necessarily better, but it's better.
They didn't get.
How far do you want to stretch this? My question is a simple yes or no answer. When they received the cease and desist, did they cease and desist, or till they straightened that out, or did the contractor keep going on?
There's two different things. There's a denial of the Board of Health, in which they kept working under what they thought was a validly issued building permit. But when the building commissioner issued a cease and desist, that's when they did stop.
Yes. So Steve is correct in that. What happened was when we denied the signature on the building permit, which usually stops everything, that's where they continued. Once we found out that the work was actually very close to completion, we issued the cease and desist, in which case they did stop when they received the cease and desist from us. But they did continue after that original message saying, we're not signing off on your building permit.
Right. So it was an invalid building permit?
No.
No?
Let me just try to give you a little clarity. On May 2nd, I denied their application and sent them an email.
Right.
Got to upgrade your septic system. Done. On July date that Stephen just gave you is when I was told that it was completed, so I sent the cease and desist. They stopped because they were done. That's why they stopped and didn't violate the cease and desist.
Yeah.
So, again, I don't want to suggest that my client or the contractor or whatever did nothing wrong here and is totally innocent and you should give them a waiver out of fairness. That's not the argument. The argument that we're making is that this is a bucket in the ground and it's not good for public health. And you would never approve it now. And we have an opportunity without any requirement to upgrade it, And so that is a net benefit that we're asking for. If you look at the variances that we're asking for to have the system in the road, it's already in the road. So it's not really, there's no net change there. If you're looking at the distance to the other wells, it's really the same location, and it's not likely a potable water well anyway. So there's no health negative to granting the variance, and there is a good health benefit to granting the variance. So does the homeowner get something out of it, something limited out of it? Yeah, it's a trade. Let them do a little bit of a finished basement with no bathroom and no plumbing and no bedroom, and will voluntarily do an IA upgrade to this pit in the road. That's what we'd like to focus on, and not necessarily the fact that this contractor has no concept of what Title V means.
You know, all right, I don't want to place blame on the contractor or the homeowner, but the bottom line is if he submitted that plan prior to starting 1 2x4, it would have been denied from the beginning once it came across our desk. So, I mean, it's like asking forgiveness. I mean, this is, anybody could do this now, you know, and then do the same thing.
Maybe we'd get another IA system or two.
Well, just
All right, let me ask a question. Can he put in a legal IA system?
IA doesn't make this compliant. You can't use an IA to make it compliant.
So even if you let him keep all the building inside that he did, he can't put an IA system in there that works?
Well, he can put one in with your variance, but again, this is about compliance and about what the regulation says on new construction,
Right.
and you need to put in a compliant system. You know, now they have more use of the house, more people can use the house, more effluent going in the house. So remove the basement, return to what it was. Eventually that system is going to fail and it's going to be repaired under maximum feasible compliance, local upgrade approval, and it's going to be an IA with an unfinished basement because the property's been overbuilt at this juncture.
And to also assume that the work was done without a property owner's consent is also wrong. The property owner also knew what was happening. Whether he knew it was wrong or right, that's a different story. The contractor knew what they were doing was wrong.
Well, not originally. Originally, they thought they were proceeding under a valid building permit. But you know, when things started going south, they definitely should have stopped sooner.
Correct.
But you know, again, what we're asking for here is a variance of something that has really no health negative, and are voluntarily putting in something with a health positive that I don't know when or if it'll be required, and the homeowner would get, you know, some finished space in the basement for voluntarily doing it. So, I mean, the other opposite is we rip everything out and leave the system the way it is. There's no health benefit there, you know.
But like Stephen said, if you give you a variance, then every guy down the road can do the whole same thing and say, oh,
Ask for
you know, I made a
forgiveness.
mistake.
Yeah.
Well, so the one factual difference here is that it is unlikely, I think, that other building permits would get issued in this scenario. The building department seems to have resolved that. So it's not as if this work was done illegally with no permit. This work was done under a validly issued, or under what we thought was a validly issued building permit, in which there was a failure in the process that has since been remediated.
Was the egress window on the original submitted plan?
On that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a separate application for the egress window.
Well, you only do
But
that
they
for
did
one
issue that
reason.
permit as well.
And that was also not brought to our office.
Right.
Right.
So again, a validly issued permit in which the building commissioner shouldn't have signed off on it should have required it going to the Board of Health, and I believe that process problem has been remediated within the town. Not that it's the town's fault either, you know. So because the work was done under validly issued permits, we'd like you to work with us in a way that's not just to give away to the homeowner, in a way that provides a net health benefit at essentially no health cost. That's our request.
The only thing I don't agree with you in is I don't think it was done under a legal building permit because it got a cease and desist order, and they kept working.
Not after the cease and desist was issued on July 29th.
The order didn't come until they were done.
Oh.
They were already ceasing.
So at the time they went to the Board of Health and applied for that, they were told you can't have bedrooms in here unless you, or what they understood was you can't have bedrooms unless you upgrade your septic system. And so they thought, okay, we'll either upgrade the septic system or make it no bedrooms.
Did they take the egress window out?
No, but I mean we could, but.
You can't upgrade the system to 5 bedrooms.
I am not going to convince you that this was like some kind of 100% innocent situation here. At some point, they should have known better. If you would like me to admit that on the record, yes. At some point, they should have.
Well,
we're
all better. On the same page right now.
Yes, for sure. So what started off correctly, proceeded into a mess.
And I understand, but someone here is to blame.
I think
there's got to be blame somewhere.
Yeah, I think it goes. I mean, if you did an analysis of this, you could find mistakes all along. The building permit application itself probably didn't have all of the information that it should have had, and the building commissioner should have required more details. Then when the permit was issued, they shouldn't have signed off on it without getting information from the Board of Health. But then later, when there seemed to be problems arising, it should have slowed down or been fixed or stopped sooner. So the blame is plenty to go around. Unfortunately, none of the people who are to blame are in the room, right? The owner's not here, the contractor's not here, and the building commissioner's not here, because those are the people that made the mistakes. But again, it's not really about punishing those people. It's about seeing whether or not there's a solution here that works. So there's really only two choices, right? One is you deny the variance and we have to rip everything out. The other one is you approve the variance based on the fact that there was at least some good faith effort to apply for a permit and to do work under a building permit, which is different than most of these other situations. And that there's a net health benefit here that's not posing any health risk. So, I would ask you to pick the second one. And if you'd like to impose conditions on that impact the finished space in a way that ensures that it's not used as a bedroom or reduces it or other things, we could talk about those details, but I don't want to get into that if you're not inclined to do it. So I would ask you to consider allowing some of this basement to be finished habitable space in exchange for the upgrade of the system.
Any other questions? Or
You know where I am.
can I get a motion in either way?
I have a motion to deny the variance. I don't want to fix someone else's mistake.
But we do get another IA system.
It doesn't matter. He can't get another IA system because it's not legal. Am I right? The IA system wouldn't fit in there anyway.
No, he can put in an IA, but you can't fix this. It's new construction. They have to comply.
Right.
So it can't even be there to begin with. If you grant the variance, you're allowing overdevelopment of a property, and it's just the first of many to come before you. That's all I'm going to say.
Can I just ask if this property was sold in 10 years and they had to upgrade the septic system, it would be an IA system? I'm not quite understanding.
Again, the standard of, especially, so you can make whatever deal you want. I'm just saying,
I'm not
trying to get away from a minimum standard.
I'm not trying. My question isn't about really being lenient. It's about if the building never happened. Say the owners never did the new construction.
Yeah.
10 years time, they sell the house.
They would have had to
If-
put
if
it
it-
have to put it
yes.
in.
If it passed, no. If it passed
only if it
inspection,
passed.
If it passes
it's
inspection.
fine.
Only if it passes.
But eventually, this thing was installed in 90?
But it wasn't used until the house was built.
Correct.
Okay.
So I
So-
believe it's only a hydraulic failure would require an upgrade, not a
Correct.
sale.
No, sale would not. You're right. But
So in this
eventually,
scenario-
an IA is going to have to go in there because under maximum feasible compliance,
Yeah.
it's going to be required under a failure. So one way or the other, it's going to happen.
At some point.
At some
But
point.
we don't really have any time frame on what that would be.
Right. It's a lightly used system in a very sandy area, so it's not as if it's gonna hydraulically fail soon.
Well, time and use, the elevation is high and the groundwater flows towards the ocean, so.
Right, so, way outside my area of expertise, but it's got plenty of life in it.
Go before I have to leave.
So, before Malcolm has to leave, can I get a motion to deny or approve them?
I made a motion to deny.
Okay, can I get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye. Deny them variance.
Thank you.
What was the vote on that?
To deny, unanimous, yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
But just for the record, Don and I were not involved.
We're not from the beginning, correct?
And for the record, I'm leaving.
All right.
Happy
Okay.
holidays, Malcolm. Enjoy the holidays.
Oh, I'll be around for a while. Everyone else join the holiday.
Yes.
272 Pulpus?
They're asking for a continuance on this till next meeting.
Okay, thanks. Request for 13 Hawthorne loan.
No objection.
Can I get a motion to approve the loan?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Waiver request for 13 Westmore drainage.
Yes, so this is they're asking for a drain at the snack bar within the wellness center. It's been there for a while, but they've never actually used it for food preparation. They're asking to use it for food preparation without the drainage. It's something we're not recommending. And there's no representative from the Westmore here today.
So are they expanding their food preparation?
They're-
They
they-
talk about smoothies or only doing.
Yeah, they want to expand their food preparation in the little room right there next to the yoga studio. But to expand the food preparation to more than just retail, in my opinion, should need the minimum code.
So what do you think, Roberta, about what you and I discussed?
If, in my opinion, even though after discussing what you and I discussed about how the possibilities of putting in drains and how everyone else would want to do things like this, actually, they can do it. They can put a drain in and they can do it and they can actually make it comply with a vent and everything.
So that's what I said. I just said, I think they should
Yeah.
put the drain in.
Yeah, they should have it.
Bring it to code, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, can I get a motion to deny the waiver for the drain?
I'll make a motion to do
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll let you guys be the task, the hard motion makers over there.
Okay, any board member updates, concerns?
Nope.
I think we're good.
The only thing I do want to say is about this Madigan thing. We've been doing this. We've been backing up on this thing for years.
Yeah.
We really have. And every time we come, when the date gets, we have to push that thing back to the people in Madigan. 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, and we really need to move on this thing.
Yeah.
We really do.
We set a date certain today. So once we get you that information, and hopefully we can start making the ball roll on the sewer part from the select board side. But we made the right decision today. We have a date, and in order to push, if we're going to push it back, we would have to open a public hearing, do the whole thing all over again. By closing the public hearing today, we've actually kind of put our foot down saying, this is the date, this day and no further.
Well, we also know we've got a minimum, amount of time. Best case scenario, if everything goes the right way, it probably won't.
And there is talk of the likelihood of a special town meeting happening. And I do think, I really, again, I heard what Malcolm was saying and hear what you're saying. I think that this also gives us an opportunity to make a case and make solid recommendations. And hopefully, whatever those recommendations are, that we would be able to get the support by, I think, having some of that information.
All righty.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved. I'll make that one.
Thanks.